When I was 10 years old, I lived in a relatively small town in Texas in a small house with my mum. My mum has always had a very caring heart for me or those in need. So when my uncle called her one night and told her he ran into a homeless girl at the local park, my mum offered to help her out for a day or so to get her back on her feet. You know, that kind of thing. When the girl arrived at my house, she said her name was Laura. Laura said she's 16 at the time and seems shy. When my mum asked why she's out there on the streets, she said she got kicked out of her home by her mum because her mum accused her of sleeping with her boyfriend. Laura said it wasn't true. She told us her mother's boyfriend was the one who came onto her. My mum gave Laura a place to sleep in. The next day after breakfast, Laura asked us to use my mum's house phone to call her mum to see if she could get some of her things back. Now Laura's mum never answered the phone, and we felt bad for her. As a 10-year-old girl, I couldn't imagine what must have been going through her head. Later that day, I remembered watching TV in the living room, minding my own business. I could feel someone staring at me. I'm kind of freaked out by this, and I turn my head. I look and Laura's staring at me with a gaze that was though she wanted to kill me. I was confused and a little startled. I turned my head away from her quickly, going back to watching TV, but I can still feel Laura's cold gaze. I couldn't understand what I have done to make her look at me this way, with such hatred. Thinking of it now, it's the most hate I've ever seen in someone's eyes. I could almost see evil in it. The next day, it happens once more. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I could feel someone looking at me. I turned my head to the side and saw Laura's head peering around the corner at me. Her eyes are dark and laced with hatred. It frightened me, and I felt so confused as to why she's looking at me this way. I didn't want to cause any trouble, so I didn't bring up Laura's gaze to my mother. Later that night, my uncle had joined us for dinner. He had stopped by to see how everything was with Laura, and if we had any luck finding her a place to live in with one of her family members. After dinner, I was washing my plate in the sink when I heard a loud growling sound coming from the dining room. I turned my head and Laura's shaking and growling like some kind of wild animal. My mum and uncle looked disturbed and worried. Laura threw herself onto the floor and began thrashing around and screaming as though she's possessed. I was absolutely terrified. It was a scary thing to witness. I grew up very religious. My mum and uncle began praying out loud for Laura while I ran into my room closing the door. This went on for 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity of horror. I could hear Laura screaming like a mad woman, growling like some kind of beast. I don't think any of us knew exactly what was going on. After my mum and uncle had prayed for Laura, for what felt like forever, Laura told us she's a demon, and that she's been taken over. None of us were sure what had caused this behaviour. None of us were sure what even happened. I peeked my head out of my room to see Laura smiling happily. She curled onto the couch with a blanket. Her eyes opened and she shot a cold glare at me. I quickly closed my bedroom door in fear and put a chair in front of my bedroom door and go to sleep. I wake up the next morning by my mum waking me up. She told me that she was taking me out to eat in my favourite restaurant. When I asked her if Laura was going out, she gave me an expression and said, "Your uncle's going to take her back to her mum's house. He slept on the couch last night after what happened. He and I were talking when the two of you had gone to sleep, and we pieced together that Laura made up the entire performance. She is not stable and we think she's dangerous." As I heard my mother say those words, I felt terrified. I got dressed and went to the car to go to the restaurant with my mum, happy to get away from her. When we got in the car, we saw Laura and my uncle getting in his truck with her. Laura appears absolutely furious, and we're starting to think she actually lied about her age. I'm 22 now, and I've never forgotten about this horrific incident and what happened all them years ago. After that day, I never saw Laura or heard from her again.
This is not my story, but instead my sister's, who will be using my account to share it all with you. When I was in high school, I was good friends with a girl called Emma. Emma was kinda quiet and shy, but always was there if you needed her. When I finished high school, I lost touch with Emma, as that's what happens with a lot of our friendships after school. 2 years later in college, I started dating a guy called Ben, and Ben's best friend Gary was Emma's boyfriend. After discovering that we all knew each other, we started hanging out again. One of the nights, we planned to all hang out in Gary's house, have a few drinks and play a few games. Myself and Ben showed up at about 8 PM to Gary's house, and Gary said Emma should be over soon. That was fine. We opened our beers and started drinking. It was nearly 9 PM and Emma still wasn't here, so we decided to ring her. Emma answered and apologised for being late. She said that she was finishing getting ready and she should be there soon. At 9:30 PM there was still no sign of Emma, so we called again. This time her younger brother picked up the phone. Her brother was 15 years old at the time and told us that Emma wasn't feeling well and was in the bathroom. Gary was worried and asked if he should head over and check on her, but her brother was adamant that he was looking after Emma and that she was alright and to enjoy her night. We didn't go home. Instead we just kept drinking and hanging out because we all thought that Emma was just having a simple flu. Just after 10 PM we decided to call one last time and check on Emma. Again her brother answered and calmly told us that Emma had gone to bed and she'll call in the morning. We left it at that, believing she was safe at home in bed and didn't want to annoy her or bother her by non-stop calling. That night Emma's mum returned home at 12 AM to find Emma dead on the kitchen floor. Emma had been bludgeoned to death by her younger brother a couple of hours earlier. We later found out that when Emma was leaving to come to us, she and her brother got into a fight about something ridiculous, and he beat her up and stabbed her over 30 times. Since her brother was a minor, he wasn't going to be sent to prison. Instead, her brother pleaded insanity and was sent to an institution. A lot of his information wasn't leaks, as the accused was a minor. I do know that his parents stuck by him, and he was released after 4 years.
This happened when I was about 13 to me and my friends, a group of boys. We were all from relatively small villages, and we loved a few times a year that we all got to go into the nearest city together and look at comic book stores. One particular time, our group split up into 2 pairs, and I went with my friend to the bank. While he's inside, I sat on a bench outside and waited. While I was there, a thin bald man approaches and sits next to me. He spoke in a German accent, carrying a briefcase, started asking if I believed in God. I told him I went to the Church of England in primary school, but I wasn't very religious and didn't know what I believed. He proceeded to open his briefcase, start showing me tons of leaflets and flyers and motivational religious images. Trying to be polite, I spoke to him and listened. After a while, he told me that he had some leaflets in his car he needed to show me, that it won't be too long. I said I wouldn't go with him, but I'd wait on the bench if he really wanted to show me. He gets really persistent now and says I have to come back to the car with him, and I felt uncomfortable. Eventually my friend comes out of the bank, and the German guy said we should both go with him to his car because he really wants to show us some interesting things. We kept saying no, and thankfully, a couple saw that we're in a sticky situation and come over asking if we're okay. This seems to scare off the guy, and he starts fleeing. When we started walking back to meet our friends, we noticed that he's now following us. Luckily, the kind couple were keeping an eye on us and shouted at him, and eventually he ran off. To this day, I'm so thankful for that couple having intervened in the situation. God knows what he would have actually done or what he had in his car. I just know it wasn't good.
This is my stalker story. It's not that bad, but I'm glad I'm moving as far away as soon as possible so I don't have to worry about this. My husband and I live abroad, and when we first moved to this country, we met a couple, H the wife and I the husband, within 2 weeks of moving. They're from my home country, so we became friends and had drinks as a couple of times. My husband and H both work, so R and I began walking our dogs together every now and then. At this point, I began noticing that R paid a lot of attention to my Facebook posts. He would comment to me about things from way before we'd even met, and if I posted something over the weekend and saw him walk the dog, he would always mention it, even if it had nothing to do with him. He also made comments that I thought were mildly inappropriate, like commenting on my tan after a beach vacation and making sexual jokes at different times. I always ignored the comments and changed the conversation. Well, I always had the feeling that he was probably lonely or socially awkward, so I let it go, but I began trying to lengthen the times between my walks, or made myself busy if he asked. He would always want to know why, and then comment like, "I'll have to hear more about it when I see you," or "That sounds like a legitimate excuse." It got to be pretty creepy, so I told him that I thought we've seen each other too frequently, and since we're both married, we should just hang out as couples. So then R texts me from a new phone number and says, "We should talk on here so our spouses don't know," and I told him I didn't want to talk to him again and blocked both of his numbers. So he sends me a message and add request on Facebook to another page where all of his friends are BDSM models and strippers, and tells me that I can message him on there. I took screenshots of it and sent them to his wife, told him not to talk to me at all, and blocked both of his Facebooks. His wife told me that she couldn't find the page, meaning he had blocked her from it. So after this, our friendship as a couple is over. I then starts following me on Instagram. I blocked 6 profiles that messaged me shortly after that Facebook ad. I never talk to people I don't know online, so it was clear to me that it was from him. The fake Instagrams he made only had pictures of places I've travelled to or mentioned wanting to travel to, TV shows I liked, and art that I'd mentioned. I put everything on private and blocked all of them. So recently he's back. I re-downloaded Words with Friends 3 weeks ago and used my real first name and a picture of my dog. I started getting requests from games from guys who I'd started playing with the week I re-downloaded it. He would start messaging me immediately whilst not making moves, or if they did make moves, there seemed to be a high number of creepy words like arouses and that sort of thing. I blocked all those and changed my name and region and picture. I hate that I have to be on guard for this guy and that he reappeared a few months later. I don't know why he keeps harassing me, and I'm happy that I'm moving far away in a few months.
Okay, this happened a couple of years ago now, but it's easily the scariest thing that I've ever been through. I was doing my second year of my degree, so I worked at a well-known fast food place. I don't want to get sued or whatever, but you'd probably recognise it. I was pretty good at my job at the time, and it wasn't too difficult to begin with. I started off doing day shifts, which is when most of the staff are working. Places like that are a revolving door, employee-wise. I worked there for 7 months, and I may have well been a lifter. While working there, I worked alongside a dude called Frank. Frank's older than me. I was in my 20s at the time, but he's in his early 30s. He had a pleasantish demeanour most of the time, but this dude is dumb as a pole. He constantly did things wrong and was absolutely frustrating all the time. More than that though, he was just kind of weird. He did weird things that didn't make any sense to anyone. Because of this, I barely spoke to him unless I absolutely had to. I wasn't at all bummed out when they decided to fire him. As far as I knew, this would be the last I ever saw of him. I was pretty indifferent about it. A few months went on, and I was eventually moved into the morning shift. We're talking 5 AM to 12 PM, and it sucked, but it meant I had afternoons free most of the time, which meant I could go ahead with uni work. I generally only worked on weekends, and any day that I didn't have university. At the time the story happened, I had already found a new job, and I was on my final day of working for this fast food place. I actually had my first shift at this new place at 4 PM that day, and wasn't planning to work, but my manager begged me to train with the new girl. I agreed. I'd still have a couple of hours to change and nap after my shift, so it's no big deal. The day fell on a Wednesday, which I never usually worked on, and I wasn't rotated to work on it. That's important to remember. So I go to the store at 5 AM and start training with the new girl as usual. Everything's pretty chill, and as per usual, we go about like normal. Up until about 7, I look over the counter and I see a familiar face. There was a line of customers, but he wasn't standing in it. More next to it, I gave a brief "Hi Frank" and turned back to what I was doing. We weren't friends and had never spoken, and I hadn't seen him in there for literally 6 months, so I didn't want to give him any more of my time. The guy just kept lingering in there though. He asked me how I was and I said fine, and asked him it back. He said he'd found a new job, and I sort of nodded, but I was serving customers, to be honest. I didn't really want to keep up the conversation. And then, weird stuff starts happening. He says if I wanted to hang out sometime, which I sort of said no. The woman I was serving gave me an amused smile, which I returned. Frank wasn't happy though, asking again. I say no. He says why. I said I had a partner and that I was busy, so no. He asked what I was busy with. I said I was going back to my hometown, which was true. I was going to do that after my shift to find my new place where my mum is. He said what was I doing there and where am I going? Frustrated now, I say I'm busy and that I need to go back to work. It's been a couple of years and honestly, it was so traumatic. I don't fully remember what happened next, but I do remember is that suddenly, this guy was acting weird. He was staring at me with wide eyes, like he didn't know what was going on. He walked around to the employee door and tried to go in, at which point I ran over, held up my hands to him, touching him pointedly, not touching him. I told him he couldn't come back there. He had to leave, and the guy's sweating now, staring at me. He sort of mumbles something, like he's arguing with me but agreeing. He even steps back a little. I tell him that he must leave and has to go. One of the customers sees this and says firmly, "Are you leaving, mate?" To which Frank nods, but makes no actual movements, just standing there shaking. The problem with working in crappy places like that is the employee door didn't lock. I closed the door anyway and moved back, so I'm on the stairs to the office. I can see the CCTV feed. I look at the feed from one pointed at the employee door and see that he's just standing there at the door, unmoving. Meanwhile, the girl is still serving customers, by the way. I was scared as hell, so I text my manager, who says she's on her way. She says it's going to be alright and just to hold tight. He's still standing there, so I ask her if it's okay if I head up to the office, which she says is fine. It's not too busy, and honestly, I wouldn't care if it was. I go upstairs to the office. Just as I get there, I hear the voice of the new girl shouting, "Wait, stop there, you can't go up there." And wow, I turn around and see Frank, dazed out of his mind, coming up the stairs. His eyes are wide open and out of it. Once again, I hold up my hands and tell him to leave, but this time, he seems completely incapable of listening and just keeps walking up the stairs towards me. I text my manager in caps saying he's upstairs. Remember what I said about working in bad places? Nothing works, which meant that the door to the office doesn't lock. As he approaches me, I slam the door shut and press my back up against it. I was hoping that because he seemed so strung out, I don't know if it was drugs or what. He would just leave, but he didn't. He starts pushing on the door, grunting and moaning, like I'm in a horror film. At this point, I just nope out of there and call the police. I'm screaming on the phone to this girl, shaking now. I've never had to call any sort of emergency service before or since, so the whole thing is just terrifying to me. And bear in mind, he's still pushing on the door as I'm doing all of this. He asked me if I know what I'm doing, or if he has a weapon. And it dawns on me that I have no idea. As soon as the dispatch girl hangs up, I hear my manager's voice talking very firmly to Frank. From what I can tell, he's sort of responding to her. I call that I've called the police, but I can't move the door. I hear the police soon enough, and they convince him to come downstairs. As he's going, he says softly, "Can my name come?" At this point, I say, "What the hell?" Soon enough, a police officer knocks on the door and tells me that they've taken him outside. He comes in and takes my statement. He tells me that all they could do is let him go, since he hasn't broken the frickin' law and doesn't seem to be on drugs. I'm scared for the life of me now, but I'm sort of glad he's gone. You'd think this is where it ends, but apparently Frank had a little prequel in mind for me. After this whole thing, I grab my phone to text my partner, and I notice I've got a new email. I check it, 6:30 that morning, from Frank. I don't know what he said, but it was essentially saying hello and how am I. He asked in the email if I'd like to go out sometime, and that I'd had a great impact on his life. What the hell? I show my manager, and she guesses that he got my email from one of the email threads, but we're not even sure if that's the case. Remember earlier though, how I said that I hadn't been rotated to work this day, that I never work on Wednesdays, that he left before I started the early shifts. There was, in theory, no way he could tell that I would be there, yet he did. I passed this information on to the police, and they told me they can't do anything, but if I saw him again, to call them. But wow, what if it's too late by then? I call my new workplace and very briefly explain the situation. They were very nice and said I don't have to come in, and that they hope I'm okay. My partner brought me home and helps me calm down, and I'm paranoid, terrified. I eventually move out of that town, but only 2 months ago, up until then, I saw him everywhere I went, and I'm in constant fear I'm gonna see him again.
I'm a nanny, and I'd been with my current family for about 2 years when the eldest started preschool a couple of days a week. I drop him off at about 9 and pick him up at 12:30, bringing his baby brother along. Now this school was very hooty-tooty, and most of the families who sent their children were very wealthy. Everyone entering the building had to wear badges with our names printed out. Every entrance had a security guard and metal detector. They employed about 10 security guards around the building that patrolled the place from open to close. I became very familiar with several of them because I passed them at their post, in and out. Most cops were making a few extra $100 on their days off. Well, during the fall 2017, the older boy moved to the new class on the other side of the school. This entrance was never as populated, so it was just a couple of people going in and out of this door during the day. The security guard was from a private company. He was always extremely polite and friendly. One of the nice security guards without a doubt. He was probably in his late 20s. I thought he looked like a young Santa Claus, round, jolly-faced, and permanently with a red nose and cheeks framed with a thick brown beard, thin framed glasses and curly brown hair that went to his shoulders. I eventually learned that his name was Nick, which only solidified my compassion. Months passed and we'd see each other 2 or 3 days a week. The boys loved to wave at him, and he'd always ask how our day was and would respond. In January of 2018, I came down with the flu and missed about 2 weeks of work. When I returned, I continued our regular schedule of school drop-offs and pick-ups. I was walking past Nick, waved, and he stopped me and said that he noticed that I was gone for 2 weeks, and he hoped that I was feeling better. I smiled, thanked him, and said that it was the sickest that I'd been, but I was glad to be back. I found it a bit odd that he noticed that I was gone, and that I was sick. I assumed my employers had told him when they did drop-offs and pick-ups while I was gone. I didn't think much of it and continued on, but when I went to leave, he stopped me again and told me that he didn't know that I wasn't the boy's mother. I laughed and basically said that people confuse me with their mum because I'm with them all the time and we kinda look similar. He laughed too, and then said, "I was wondering, I never saw you with a husband, and you don't have a ring on your finger, so I thought you were just a single mum." I laughed nervously to this, and didn't know what to say. "Nope, just a nanny," I said. I wanted to kick myself once again when I got back in the car. I was caught off guard, and generally I'm a bit awkward, so tend not to respond best when I'm put on the spot. I guess I didn't realise that he paid that much attention to me. I was a bit uneasy, but found it harmless. The next day I said hello, and he responded by calling me by name, which he had never done before, and telling me I looked nice, which he definitely had never done before, and I was surprised. I started to think maybe he was interested in me, since learning that I'm not actually a single mum. This sounded weird to me. I'm gay, and I look very gay, so men very seldom take an interest in me, and when they do, I'm weirded out. When I left, we exchanged a simple goodbye, and the rest of the week went by pretty non-eventful. In early February, I was doing the drop-off yet again, when on the way out with a baby strapped to my chest, Nick stopped me. He was very courteous, but he asked me if I'd be interested in going to dinner with him in the weekend. Again, I'm incredibly awkward, so my response was to laugh, and I could see that he was immediately offended. I apologised and tried to explain that I was actually engaged and had been in a long-term relationship. This was true. His face changed and he said, "Well, where's your ring?" The way he said this made me uncomfortable. I told him that I don't really like wearing jewellery to work, so I only wear it on the weekends. I had accidentally scratched the baby with the ring when he was just a newborn, and basically decided it wasn't something I wanted to wear carrying them. He didn't seem satisfied with my answer, but let me go and told me to have a good evening. When I came to pick up the older boy that afternoon, Nick seemed agitated. I said hello, and no answer. Okay. I was upset, but let it go. I didn't want this guy to have hurt feelings, but geez, could he not tell that I was gay? The constant button-ups didn't clue him in. Did I need an undercut? It wasn't personal. Why was he so angry? When I left, he again ignored me. I kinda just swallowed and thought, oh well, he'll get over it. I had put the baby in his seat in the back of my car, and was buckling up the 3-year-old when I heard a voice behind me. "You don't have to lie to me," he boomed. I whipped around, and Nick was about a foot away from me. I was grabbed between the car, the open door, and his body. He no longer looked like a polite, jolly young man. He was big, probably about 6'2", and easily 400 pounds. I was scared and I was angry. How dare he come up to me and scare me? How dare he corner me and intimidate me when he knows I'm doing my job? I hurried out the doorway and shut the door and locked it, with the keys in my hand. I stood inches away and tried to back up. "You didn't need to lie to me. You aren't interested in me. Just tell me. I don't like liars." I didn't owe this guy anything, but I explained that I wasn't lying. I said that I'm engaged and it's nothing personal. He was nice and a friendly guy, and I didn't mean to hurt his feelings. He was angry. He huffed and said, "Oh, you didn't hurt my feelings. I just don't appreciate dishonesty. You lied to me about their mother, so I figured you're lying about this too." I was mad. I never once lied about being their mother. He assumed because I was the one doing the drop-offs and pick-ups. Our conversations never go beyond hello, good day, and goodbye until recently. I decided our conversation was over. He was talking down to me and accused me of nonsense. I told him I never lied about this or anything, and I didn't appreciate his tone. I went around and got in the car, and he followed, but kept his distance, and said, "I'm not even sure why I wasted my time on you anyways." I was shocked. He was a completely different person. I avoid altercations at all costs, so for someone to speak to me like this was very upsetting. I ended up disclosing the situation to my employers, who got very upset. They didn't like how he spoke to me, and especially didn't like what he did around the children. I ended up contacting the school, which were mortified about it. I was terrified to see him again, knowing he'd know that I'd told. That never happened. He was fired and replaced with a retired cop who was incredibly unfriendly, and I was grateful. I felt bad. I thought that my employers had overreacted, but they were prone to overreactions, and honestly, I was selfishly happy that I wouldn't have to see him again. I was worried about how awkward it may be. I let it go, and weeks passed, and school drop-offs were uneventful. However, in May of 2018 that changed. I live in an enclosed apartment complex in uptown Dallas. Our apartment neighbours a ton of bars, so we have some issues with break-ins and vandalisms. We've always had police presence, but after an incident where some drunk guy broke into the office through a window of the manager's office, they decided to hire security guards. Guess who ended up doing the night shifts? Nick. When I first saw him, I was checking my mail and he passed me in his uniform. I froze and he looked me in the eye and said, "Good evening, Mum." Good, he must have forgotten me. I was shaken up as I went to the apartment and immediately told my fiancée who I saw. She was aware of the situation with Nick at the old preschool, and being the daughter of a cop was always more suspicious and suspected the absolute worst of everyone. She didn't want him to find out which apartment was ours, so we started talking back at the elevator and parking in a different area. He only patrolled the office area and the perimeter of the building, so we found it easy to avoid him for a week or so. One day, the back of the elevator was out of order, so I had to take the front elevator from the parking garage up to my apartment on the 4th floor. The elevator stops in the lobby and Nick walks on, and I freeze. I guess he could sense that I was anxious. He looked at me and said, "Don't worry," and said my name. "I'm not mad you got me fired, just don't do it again." I didn't even respond. I just got off the 4th floor and then thought, oh no, now he knows what floor I live on. I immediately ran inside and told my fiancée, and she said that she would contact the management. I convinced her that this was a bad idea. It could make him angry, and I doubt he'd be let go. He hasn't done anything, but he did follow me here. He knew me. How did he end up here? It seemed like too much of a coincidence. I will say we lived in panic. We kept our door bolted and installed a camera. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the story of Jennifer Maury. She was a young lawyer living in an apartment similar to mine in Houston. She was stalked and attacked by her apartment security guard. He had access to her apartment. She survived, went through a horrible ordeal, and we were both terrified this could happen to us. Every noise terrified us. We'd get up to make sure the door was bolted several times before we go to bed. That summer, we were convinced that he would try and do something. Maybe just our overactive, worried minds. We ended up avoiding him for the most part. We saw him occasionally, but he didn't seem interested, and although we were always wary, we figured he got over it and let our guards down. And he never did bother me again. He never said much of anything to me when I did see him. I decided that maybe he was already having a hard time last fall, and he was a really nice guy who maybe didn't have the best social skills. Fall 2018 rolls around, and I'm busy with work, and my fiancée is out of town often on business meetings. One weekend, I'm home alone, it's 3:30 PM, and I'm walking down to the office to get a package. There's about 3 squad cars and police all over the lobby and going up the stairs. I'm wondering what happened, but like I said, we live next to the bars, and we have incidents with drunks all the time, so I figured someone had an altercation or something got stolen. I tried to eavesdrop, but I don't hear much. I go about my day and receive an email from my apartment complex, and they have a community-wide meeting scheduled to discuss the incident and go over my resident safety concerns. I'm wondering what happened, so of course I go to the meeting, and guess what? A young girl, single girl, living in an apartment by herself, showed up mid-afternoon to find Nick inside her apartment. She came in and her drawers were in disarray. He was hiding in her closet and came up as an excuse. The security guards do not have keys to any apartments and aren't supposed to be in any of the residence halls. Later we found out that he's been stalking this girl and stole the keys from the maintenance and made copies. This has been going on for at least a month, if not longer. They found several of his belongings in his vehicle, and he was obviously fired and charged. I didn't know exactly what happened to him, but we assumed he did some time. I was absolutely terrified, and of course our apartment complex got the pants sued out of them. I was glad his attention shifted, but wonder what could have happened to this girl. But this wasn't the last time I heard of him. A few weeks ago, over a year since I last saw him, I went into this big fancy mall in my city, and guess who's working security? Nick. My first question was, are you kidding me? My second thought was, how on earth did this guy keep getting security jobs? Who is dropping the ball here? I saw him and turned around and walked right out the door. Thankfully, I'm moving out of state in a month. So Nick, let's never meet again.
I was hiking alone once in a mountain range. Now I didn't know the area very well, but I learnt about it afterwards. It was getting close to nightfall, and I decided I had to set up my tent and get ready for the snow. I wanted to try and get a small fire going before it got too cold. As I'm doing so, I see a really nice tree. I'm about to walk up to it when my ears begin ringing. My vision goes black for a second. I wipe my eyes and look up, and there's blood everywhere. It literally looks like a murder scene, and I can hear this terrifying screaming sound. I wipe my eyes thinking this can't be real, and suddenly, all of the sound stops, and I'm met with silence. I look up and everything's normal, there's no blood anywhere. I scream and start running the opposite direction I come in. Eventually I make it back to a ranger station. When I'm there, I describe what happened and say that I think someone's been murdered out there. They ask me to describe where I was and I give my exact location. As I do so, the ranger goes white and says, "A murder took place there 25 years ago. It sounds like you stumbled upon the exact scene of where it happened." I said that can't be true because it literally just happened. He says that we must check it out, but he doesn't think we'll find anything. I tell him this is stupid, that I've just seen this here and he must be mistaken. So anyway, we head out there and there's nothing. What's worse is apparently I'm not the first person to report this either. Apparently the same thing got reported over 10 years ago, at the exact same spot, where nothing was found afterwards.
Quick background. My sister and I work at the same place. We work at a golf course. I've been there for 3 years, and she's been there for 2. Overall, it's a great job. I like 96% of the staff. We have one guy, I wrote about him earlier, that was a pain in the butt. Thankfully, he straightened out and got it together. This story's about a different guy. To be honest, I have no clue what this guy even does for the golf course. All of what I'm about to tell you leads up to what happened with my sister. He told me he worked there, but I was just recently informed he didn't actually. This guy, about early 40s, was nice to me when I started working there. We had good conversations, but at the end of the last season and the beginning of this season, something felt off. First thing he asked me when I came back mid-spring for the start of the season was, "How old are you?" I don't like that opening line at all. I hate when the first thing men ask me is my age. I'm 21, but I could pass for 17. I asked, "Why are you asking?" He said, "Just curious." I was just shy of 21 at the time. I answered 20, and he was like, "Cool." He asked me how college is going, and just like a normal conversation really. About 3 or 4 weeks later, he asked me for my Snapchat. I didn't like that. I told him no, and that's weird. He also decided to come behind the counter while I was busy to ask me something. Unless you work in the inside of the clubhouse, you're not allowed behind the snack counter. I told him he can't be back here, and he was kinda mad. The rule was set by the health department. He decided he didn't like me after that. I was basically declared a bitch to him. Anyway, fast forward to about 2 weeks ago. This guy won't even come near me or look me in the eye. Alright, I couldn't care less. But then one day, I got a ton of frantic text messages from my sister who was working there. She had sent me pictures saying that he had been sexually harassing her. He kept saying he could see through her shirt and if she had Tinder and would swipe left on her. She was wearing a red t-shirt and jeans. You couldn't see through her shirt. Then he asked her to take it off and I freaked out. That's my 19-year-old sister. I was supposed to drop her off a jacket anyway, so I headed up there. I called the supervisor, who went there and was shocked. He had no clue and was getting angry. I got there and was thinking, this guy better pray he doesn't run into me. Well, he was there. He noped out of there. When I get really mad, I shake. I went inside the clubhouse and stayed there for about 15 minutes with my sister. She was a little shaken up, but okay. She was more shocked because she has never been hit on or anything. She said he used to confuse her for me. This guy also said, "Your sister's really mean and nasty." My supervisor was not happy at all and said she'd deal with it. Well, he did alright, and it was pure gold. We have two guys, one in his 20s and one in his early 30s, that would work at the golf course too. They're brothers, and we went to the same school. Well, the two brothers don't like the creepy guy, and my supervisor told him what happened. The two brothers cornered him and scared him half to death. I'm pretty sure they threatened him. He came back in and apologised. He had the nerve to say, "I didn't mean to be a creep." My sister said, "Are you serious? You are creepy. Don't ever talk to me again." One of the golfers comes in all the time with his daughter heard about the incident too. His daughter offered to walk my sister to her car. My supervisor spoke to him the next day and told him he's not allowed to speak to me or my sister. 2 days ago is when I found out he doesn't work there anymore. I saw him the other day and he wouldn't even look me in the eye. My supervisor was waiting for me to lose it on him, but I decided against it. We were packed and I didn't want to cause a scene. I'm hoping he learned his lesson.
I recently switched from an Android phone to an iPhone, so I had to switch out the SIM card because the one did not match with the new phone. I was told to go to my service provider's shop so that an assistant could help me put in a new SIM card on my phone and potentially transfer my contacts. When I went in, I saw this guy sitting and waiting to be serviced. He started talking to me and I treated him nicely until he was called to be serviced. He was done while I was in the waiting line. Instead of leaving, he come up and starts talking to me again. At first it was light stuff like asking what's wrong with my phone, but then it escalates. He said to me when I'm free we can get pizza, but I replied that I'm too busy with exams now, and instead of relenting, he starts asking me to list date ideas and any upcoming exams that are happening. I said I have a boyfriend and that I don't want to meet him. However, he kept insisting that we have to go and that there's nothing wrong with it and it would just be eating and drinking wine. I told him I'm uncomfortable with the idea of meeting up a stranger that's much older than me alone. He said, well, we'll see what happens after. I was very creeped out to this point because this man wasn't relenting at all. So I told him plainly that he has to leave. He grabs my arm. Please note this is 2 PM in a store with lots of people around. The guard's a tiny woman. I made a scene and called over the guard and started yelling as he tries to drag me out. I say I'm going to call the police and he lets go and walks out casually, then sprints the second he rounds the corner. I never saw him again. I reported him to the police, but they say they can't really do much based off my description.
On Monday, my boyfriend and I stopped at Publix, a grocery store, to get subs between class. He went to grab something in the store, and I went over to the subline to get our order started. When I got to the subline, the only other person ahead of me was a kid about my age. He kept staring back at me, and every time I looked up, I caught him staring at me. Finally, my boyfriend came over. They were being super slow at the subline, so I hadn't even ordered yet. This kid in front of us started looking back even longer when my boyfriend got there. His eyes were really intense when he was staring, and his mouth was always a little open. It was a creepy look. He was getting 4 different 6-inch subs. They told him it would be almost half the price if he got 2 footlongs, and he huffed super loudly and said, if I wanted that I would have gotten it. He then pulls out 2 avocados and asked them to put it in his sandwiches. They said, we've got avocados here if you don't want us to use the ones you've already paid for. And he kept mumbling something to himself and rolling his eyes and pushing his jaw forward or side to side. He looked very tense and irritated. He then asked if we were High Point University students, and we said yes. He just nodded his head. I asked if he was too, and he said, yeah, freshman, just staring with his creepy eyes and clicking his jaw. We got our subs and left. As we were walking out, I said, something's not right about that kid, there's something definitely wrong there. And my boyfriend said, I think he might have been autistic or have Tourette's. I said no because I had a weird feeling about the guy. My boyfriend even jokingly said, someone who orders 4 6-inch subs instead of 2 footlongs is definitely weird. but for some reason my mind kept going back to him. He seemed like a genuine outcast and a loner, and I felt bad for him. Well, not even a few days later, I get an email from a student that was caught with multiple guns in their room and had a plan and a timeline for a school shooting. I searched it online, and sure enough, the kid's face is the first thing that popped up. Paul, I hope you get the help you need.